Hello! Welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you're new here. My name is Josh, and today we will be talking about the GoodReads 2023 year in books. Now this is something that I look forward to checking out every single year. If you're not familiar with GoodReads, no, this is not an ad by the way. GoodReads is basically a platform that is an international database of all the books that have been published, that are yet to be published, and that are no longer in print. And you can use this database to create your own lists of books that you want to read, your TBR, books that you have already read, books that you own, books that you think should be included in certain types of lists, like things that should be studied in school, or maybe certain reading challenges like Reading Around the World Challenge, or the current year's reading challenge, which is something that we're also going to be talking about today. It's a really fun platform if you are really interested in reading, if you're interested in literature, if you like to leave reviews or read reviews, rate books, get in contact with other readers like you, or even the authors themselves. So definitely check it out if you are interested. But that's not what this video is about. It's not trying to convince people to become users of the platform, but simply it is for me to react to my 2023 year books. Now, what this is basically a review of all the books that I've read this year, and it provides different statistics regarding those books. I have the app open here on my phone, and I have not seen this yet. This here, if I click on it, my year in books 2023, there we go. This year it says that I have read 11,634 pages, which is pretty good. I'm pretty sure I've read more than that in a year, so this one might be on the lower end, but that's not surprising because I have read some shorter books this year, which I'll discuss as why later. 64 books is actually the amount that I've read this year, which is the most I've ever read in a year. Last year, I believe I read 52 or 54, which was the most I had ever read. This year, I read 64. So that's quite exciting. Reading is something that I wanted to get more into, and I definitely have. And so I'm quite pleased with that particular result, especially since the reading challenge that I joined in the beginning of this year was actually 20 books. I pledged 20 books. I didn't want to put any pressure on myself. I wanted to still have fun, but I still wanted to keep myself accountable to reading. And so 20 books was the number that I put down. I knew I would probably do more, and I definitely did, 3 times as much. I just wanted to, not be too zealous, because sometimes I can be overzealous with things that I do. And this was not one of those areas that I wanted to do that in. So that was a personal goal of mine, in addition to the reading challenge. Now, when we take a look at the statistics from this reading challenge and this year in review, it says that the shortest book was at 24 pages, which is quite short, actually. It was a children's book called Powwow Counting in Cree by Penny M. Thomas and illustrated by Melinda Josie. This was a shorter book. It was for a younger audience than the typical children's book, because it was teaching counting in the Cree language. It also was really beautiful. It talked about different cultural aspects, including ceremonial aspects in the Cree cultures, and I thought it was very interesting and beautifully illustrated, and definitely an important book to read, particularly if you are residing in Canada. But if you're not, it's still really fascinating. It's always fun to learn about other cultures and other ways of life. So I definitely encourage you to read that one. Longest book that I read, I'm not surprised by this because I am a little bit late to the train on this one, that is for sure. And the reason why is because I was intimidated by the length of this book. This book is Dune by Frank Herbert, and it is now a major motion picture starring Timothée Chalamet and Zendaya, among others. This one is 658 pages, and normally I have this big book fear. I see a big book, one that's really long, and by really long I mean, for me personally, anything that's 400 pages or up over. 400 pages is actually pretty common in the literature space, but for me it's a lot. I was a little bit nervous to read this, especially because if I didn't like it, I didn't want to have to DNF it. Fortunately, I did not have to DNF it because it turned out being a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. It was really interesting the way that the story was executed and the world that was built. And I'll be talking more about that in my December wrap-up video, but this one is definitely something that surprised me, even though the fact that it's my longest book of the year is not surprising at all. Let's see here, scrolling further down, my average book length this past year is 181 pages. This is not surprising, because normally I get between 220 to 270-ish pages on average, largely because I don't like to read thicker books. But this year I did make a personal pledge, and that was to read more children's books, more picture books, because when I was young, I found a lot of them quite impactful. And so I wanted to see how children's literature has evolved over the last few decades, and see, you know, what is being taught now, what is being shared now, what kind of stories are being told, how they're being told. And honestly, I have discovered that it is quite the art form. The illustration alone is an art form, of course, but how that relates to the story is also an art form. And I think what also lends to it is the way in which the author chooses to write something lyrical and beautiful, but also captivating for a young child, but also meaningful in terms of story and message that could be nuanced and complex, but it's simplified enough for a child to understand. I think that is quite the feat. So it has been a really fun exploration in 2023. If we actually take a look here, this is a statistic that I actually brought up, because this is not one that is in the 2023 year in books stats. 38 books were for adults, so non-fiction as well as fiction, and 26 books were simply picture books. So I read a good chunk. The most shelved book, meaning the book that is most widely read or people want to read it, is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. This one was shelved by 7,465,605 people, which is huge! But because it is an American classic, that is totally reasonable. Classics are popular. People want to read them. It doesn't matter what generation it is, how many decades pass, hundreds of years pass, people are still interested in them, and that's why they are a classic. They're timeless. So I'm not surprised that this is the most shelved book. This book is something that is often studied in Canadian schools. I did not personally study it, but many of my friends did, my wife did, so I actually wanted to see what all the hype was. I also watched the movie and enjoyed the movie, so I read the book after. And I'm quite happy that I did read it, but it wasn't my favorite. I will admit that. I'm not a big classic reader, but at the same time, I do have some classic books that I fully enjoy and love, and this one just wasn't one of them, unfortunately, for me. I still encourage you to read this book because it has some fascinating writing. It's beautifully written. It is very lyrical. It's very poetic in the way that it is written. And it talks about a lot of interesting societal aspects from the 1920s in the United States, and the idea of excess and what that can do to a person. The reason why I did not particularly enjoy it was because I felt like it focused too much on those elements. The plot line kind of felt flat. I feel like if you're going to put those elements in there, it should feed the plot line, and I just felt like it was just a little bit superficial, which is ironic considering the non-superficial aspects of the book itself. The least shelved, unfortunately, is only shelved by 81 people, and it is The Blind Boy and the Loon, which is a picture book by Alethea Arnaqui-Baril. I'm really sorry about that terrible pronunciation. I'm not familiar with the phonetics of that particular name. I'm not surprised that this one is one of the least shelved, because unfortunately in Canada, due to a variety of reasons, Indigenous literature is not very popular. I wish that it was. It is becoming more and more popular, which is fantastic, and I myself have been able to find more Indigenous literature to read too, which has been fun and which has been informative and interesting. And this particular book, it is basically the author retelling a story that she had been told, I believe by her grandfather, growing up. And so it is her version of this, and it is also her way of continuing the tradition of storytelling. The illustration is haunting, absolutely haunting, in a good way. It feeds the actual story itself. They match each other very well, but it is kind of scary. I will say that. I don't know if I would want to read this as a child, because I would probably be afraid. Knowing myself, I definitely would have been afraid reading this book, but it does teach a good message. My average rating this year is 3.3 out of 5 stars. Now, I know a lot of people have told me that 3 out of 5 is low, but personally I think 3 out of 5 means that it's good. It's still above 50%, therefore it's in the positive range. And when I rate a book 3 out of 5, that actually means that I have enjoyed it, that I liked the story, I liked the writing, I liked the character development. There were a number of things that could have been changed, but it did not affect it enough for me to dislike the experience. So that's when I give it 3 out of 5. If it is a 4 out of 5, that means that it is near perfect, it is really, really good, it is impactful, enjoyable, you know, things are written well, the story is executed well, the characters are lovable, or maybe you don't love them, but it is meaningful in that regard, so it makes sense, things are logical. That's a 4 out of 5. A 5 out of 5 is downright near perfection. Like, nothing can be perfect, so it's as close as you can get. Things are technically fantastic in terms of the language, in terms of the lyricism, the sentence structuring, the grammar, the literary devices that are used, the storytelling, the threading in the storytelling, the logic, the precision, the conciseness, the cohesion, everything. It just is absolutely fantastic. Things that you can learn from, things that make you think, that they're thought-provoking. Those are 5 out of 5 stars, and I don't give a lot of those away. My highest rated book on GoodReads is called Solvay by Lupita Nyong'o, who is a fantastic actress. If you have ever seen 12 Years a Slave, you know. If you haven't, you need to know, so check it out. It's a wonderful movie, horribly, heart-wrenchingly sad, but it is so well done, and she does a fantastic job. She is so believable, and it is gonna mess you up. After you watch that movie, you're gonna cry so much, is what I mean to say. The book that she wrote is absolutely gorgeous. It is a picture book for children, and it talks about the different shades of skin that people from the African American community, people of African descent have, and how all these different shades are beautiful. It speaks on colorism and racism and self-identity and self-hatred and self-acceptance and comparison and bullying. I absolutely loved it. I thought the illustrations were magical. It's kind of got this fantastical element, this mythical element even, and it is so much fun. I would definitely buy this book for my future children. Highly recommend this one. This one is highest rated on GoodReads because it got a 4.67 out of 5 stars. So it looks like that is about it here. But before we go, I just want to check some stats on StoryGraph. Again, not an ad, but this is another similar application, though in my opinion not as good, but it does have some interesting statistics. It says that I read a variety of books with different moods. According to this pie chart, because it does give you a little bit of a pie chart, the largest section, which is almost a quarter of this pie chart, are stories that are emotional. I'm kind of surprised by that, because I thought I read a lot of rom-coms this year, because I was really feeling the lightheartedness of it, but apparently I read some heavier topics, so that's interesting. Another large section is lighthearted, which makes sense. That one looks like it is 2, 4, 6, 8, an eighth of the pie. Another eighth of the pie is something that is reflective, which goes with the emotional quality, so that's fair. Then inspiring and hopeful are followed by informative. Informative makes sense because I read a lot of cultural works of literature, followed by funny and adventurous, mysterious, and then the really lower, percentages in this pie chart are sad, tense, dark, and challenging. While I did read a lot of emotional stuff, a lot of it was inspiring and apparently lighthearted and informative and hopeful. So that's actually a positive thing. So let's see here, when we check out the pace, it says 13% of the books that I read had a slow pace. Okay, 25% of the books had a fast pace, and 62% of the books had a medium pace. Not bad. And in terms of page number, 75% of the books that I read had over 300 pages. 2% had over 500 pages, which, you know, makes sense. And 23% had between 300 and 499. So that's interesting. 84% of the books I read were fiction, 16% were non-fiction, because I read some memoirs this year. Most copious genre was children's books, or picture books. Makes sense, not surprised by that. Followed by romance, not surprised by that. Like I said, I was really feeling the rom-coms, so I'm sure I read a lot of those. Then contemporary fiction. The last thing that I want to do before we go is I want to discuss my goals for this following year of 2024. Now, I think I'm going to make a goal of 24 books, so that's 2 books per month. I think that is not putting too much pressure on myself. I think that's quite realistic. I'm sure that I will get over that once again. But I think that that should be a good foundation for myself there. I also want to continue my exploration of children's literature, specifically picture books, to see what kind of books are out there. I have quite a few on my TBR that I want to check out from the library. Unfortunately, the library here has a lot, so I'm quite happy about that. And I think I'd also like to find some Indigenous fiction, like novels for adults. Young adult is okay, I think, but I would prefer adult fiction. I find that it's really hard to find Indigenous works of literature that are fiction. Most I find are non-fiction, whether they are memoirs or, you know, textbooks or history books or politics, etc. But I really want to read some Indigenous fiction. I read a little bit, but I want to read more. I have some ideas of which books I'd like to find, but that is definitely another goal of mine, so I really hope to meet that this next year. Let me know in the comments down below what you would like to read in 2024. How many books would you like to read? Which genres would you like to explore? What kind of books do you want to explore? Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I greatly, greatly appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you all next time. Until then, bye for now.